Dietrich. Welcome to Unscripted Moments, a podcast about propaganda.
Hey, how's it going?
Pat, it's great that you're here. I'm wondering if you can just spend a moment and introduce yourself a little bit to the listeners out there so they know who you are and what you do.
Hey, my name's Pat Dietrich. I play drums in a punk band called Handheld. We've kind of been active, since about 1998. It's a bunch of my best friends from sort of like grade school, sort of that high school band that never stopped being a band. And and then so I play drums in that band, and I also sing and play guitar in another band called Curbside, and do a bunch of other sort of music production, recording stuff, mostly just for my own bands, but for some friends' bands as well.
Well, Pat, what's really funny is the way that I found you because I didn't know your bands growing up. I listened to tons of music like your bands growing up in St. Louis, but your bands never crossed my path until very recently when my friend Jeff and I drove to Toronto from Buffalo to see Lagwagon and Cigar, and suddenly your band is opening up. So I'm like, searching for your band online kind of while you guys are on stage, which is a habit that I have when I'm seeing most new bands for the first time.
Nice.
And I'm like, who am I watching right now? I don't know any of this. This sounds really good though. Who is this band? And so I noticed that the band has a really new LP on Thousand Islands Records,
Yes.
a Canadian tragedy. Been listening to it the last couple of weeks since I saw that show at Danforth Music Hall in Toronto. You just want to like shout out kind of like what you guys have going on, like in either of your bands, because it sounds like it's kind of an exciting time for you all.
Yeah, it is. So, especially with my deep friends in Handheld, we were sort of active from 98 till about 2008, and then we took some time off. And then I sort of started up Curbside with a few of those members, and we did a bunch of albums there. And then in about 2019, we decided to sort of, hey, let's do like one show as a reunion with Handheld. And then cue the pandemic and all that fun stuff. And then we
Mm.
ended up saying, oh, maybe we should write an album. And that's kind of what we did. And it was interesting because um, our lead vocalist Andy does a lot of our writing. Really crafted some pretty interesting songs with this, and before we knew it, we had like a concept album on our hand, which we had never done before, where he was sort of like 5 songs deep into lyric writing. They were all about dead Canadians, so it was this
Mm.
sort of interesting theme developing. So then we kind of really went full on with this sort of Canadian theme to this record, and it was a really fun LP to do. So we're really happy with how it came out, and we just sort of been doing some turnaround and playing shows in support of that. And
Wonderful.
yeah,
Man, that's great. I'm really enjoying the record, and I'm enjoying finding a brand new band that's been around for a long time, has a long history, and is brand new to me, which is always kind of a cool discovery. So I'm really glad that I came out early for that show because I don't know, I think I posted like an Instagram story tagging you, and it was just wonderful that you immediately wrote back, and you were just so cool to chat with immediately. And we had this idea to do some episodes of this podcast together because you were like, I'm a huge propaganda fan. I was like, yes. So I included a cover that you did the other day. At the very top of this episode, listeners heard your rendition of Anchorless, which everybody knows is track 4 on Propaganda's Last Talk More Rock, and track 11 on the Weaker Thans album Fallow. And I want to know specifically about your introduction of how you came to be a fan of the writer of this song, John K. Sampson.
sure. So I mean, that would obviously go back to myself as a propaganda fan. And I've got an interesting sort of genesis to this all is that so I was sort of born and raised in the town in southwestern Ontario called Kitchener. And there's like a sister town called Waterloo, so a lot of people call
Hmm.
it Kitchener Waterloo, Ontario. And in my early days of sort of getting into punk music, even but I was probably too young to ever even go to a show, like even in all ages. I probably would have been maybe, I don't know, 12 years old or something like that. There was like these sort of folklore legends about propaganda and them coming to our town, and specifically like they played this sort of almost like an all ages rec center venue. And there's all these legends about the show where like, oh, apparently one of the guys was naked. Oh,
Mm,
and apparently he spent 30 minutes doing a speech and yelling at everyone in the crowd and telling them like there was all these like crazy stories about Chris. And I was
yeah.
just like, what? Like I'd never heard this band. I was like, what is this? And then of course it was sort of years later I had heard, Anti-Manifesto on sort of Survival of the Fattest and then, you know, or sorry, that would have been on Fat Music for Fat People. What the first couple Fat compilations and then Nation States on Survival of the Fattest. And those were like the first songs I really heard. And then for me, when I did finally get to hear, Let's Talk More Rock, that was just, a huge album for me. And that's how I really got into them. Like I can't understate that. That was like a life-changing album for me. And just how I discovered it and how I got into it. It was sort of high school sort of thing. And I had a summer job and I had this job where I could kind of be pretty locked in a room and doing this sort of labor activity. And I could just put on music for the whole summer. So I had that CD and I would just play it front to back every day. And I had sort of come from this conservative Catholic family. So that record had taught me so many things that I would have never, learned in my life for values going forward. So it was,
Yeah.
yeah, pretty important record to me.
Do you think so? This has come up on the podcast several times in the past. Do you think that Less Talk More Rock might be Propaganda's most important record that they have made?
I mean, if you're asking me, I would say 1000%,
Nice.
because I just think it was the time it came out. Like, for me reading, I'm like gay positive. I'm like, well, people in my dressing room are calling people like
Yeah.
derogatory words all the time. I'm like, what do you mean gay positive? Like like it was just like I almost couldn't believe what I was reading at that. It was the time it came out, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, I thought, yeah, it was amazing.
So John Sampson leaves Propaganda in 96 after the release of this record. Um,
Yes.
but and then he goes on to form the Weaker Thans, obviously, which is an amazing band in and of its own right. And I'm wondering how you feel about the first era of Propaganda, the John years of How to Clean Everything and Let's Talk More Rock, versus like where they go on to next after that. Like, how do you compare the two eras, if that makes sense?
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm definitely one of these fans. Maybe I'm in the majority, maybe it's a minority, I'm not sure, with Propaganda fans, but I actually love every era as much as the next. Like
Yeah.
I really do. Like that first era, it was I love it so much because it was almost so wrong. Like it was such a dichotomy of those the two, it was so
Yeah.
wrong that it was right. I'm just like, what? Like your Chris is like yelling and it was so aggressive, and then like the softest, like beautiful voice coming on. Like it was just it's kind of like you knew it wasn't a fit, but that's why I really liked it. Just with the harmonies coming over Chris. Yeah, it was. And then sort of going beyond that, obviously with today's Empires and Todd came in, to me that was just like a whole new level of technical playing and aggression. Like that was amazing. And then when John left to do the Weaker Thans, I was like, well, this is amazing. Like this is almost like it was sort of like both paths sort of had to happen with that start. I liked every direction it went, and I still do to this day.
Yeah, something I'm wondering about is how the Weaker Thans kind of landed with you. Because for me, as a fan of Propaganda in the 90s, like whenever the Weaker Thans Fallow came out, I got it on CD. It came out in the US from Sub City a couple of years after its initial release in Canada on G7. So I didn't hear it for quite some time. But whenever I heard it, like it didn't quite land for me. It took several more years for me. But was this something that you appreciated, like out of the gate? Were you a Weaker Thans fan right away?
I would love to say that, but I honestly it was almost, see, I know you, it was almost exactly the same as you. When I had heard that first version, I really didn't like it at all, like the Weaker
Hmm.
Thans version, because I think it was just the age I was at and where I wasn't ready for something to be slower and
Yeah.
softer. That wasn't what I was into at the time. Um, so for me, it really wasn't probably until Reconstruction Site when I was really sort of just loving and eating up all the Weaker Thans material. Those first two albums, I can go back now and listen to them and really, really appreciate them. But I guess it was just at that time in my life, it was a little, wasn't where I was with my personal listening taste. So it was expanding my musical taste for sure at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. For me, songs like Aside and Watermark
Yeah.
on Left and Leaving. Those songs hit me pretty instantaneously whenever that
Hmm.
record came out. But for me, it really wasn't until maybe the last like 5 years that the Weaker Than started to make a lot of sense to like to connect with me as a
Yeah.
listener. Like I think I had to like turn 35 for that to
Yeah.
happen. And now that I'm like 40, I put on the Weaker Thans as much as I put on Propaganda these days. So it kind of for
Yes.
me was like an age thing because I was like, whenever they were coming around, I was listening to Twisted by Design, Making Friends. I was listening to obviously a ton of Propaganda, but I needed that fast, crazy technical stuff back then. And the Weaker Thans were just kind of like they weren't really my jam until just the last couple of years.
Yeah, I'd kind of echo that as well. It was just it took me longer to get going with them.
Hmm.
Um, but then, like I said, since Reconstruction Site, and then I really loved all those records, and then was almost really sort of sad when they stopped playing. And then when John was doing his solo stuff, I really loved that too. I got to see him live a few times, touring Provincial and Winter Wheat.
Mm,
Love those records so much.
yeah.
So yeah.
Tell me about what you remember about seeing about those live shows, those solo shows.
Oh, they were awesome. Like, and they were always at like, again for me, I just coming from this, I was really into just fast, loud punk rock and hardcore in those early days. So it was like I don't want to, lump his style in with like indie bands, but of course it was definitely almost like a different scene, right? So I remember seeing him in like a bookstore,
Mm,
and then and then we saw last time I saw him was in Guelph, Ontario, and it was yeah, sort of in a venue that I wouldn't normally see you know concerts in. So it was really cool. It was like a lot more intimate, and just like he was talking to the crowd, and I just I didn't get to see a lot of acts like that. I just loved it. It was just way more personal and intimate, and of course still threw in a couple propaganda covers as he does.
amazing.
And so it was great.
Did you get to see him play his version of Gifts at all? Have you ever seen that live?
Yes, he absolutely played that in the last it was the like it was a John solo tour, and he was playing with another sort of group that was with him. Oh, I'm gonna butcher the name. I think it was called like the Pine Cones or something like that. Do you
Mm,
know anything about this?
no, I don't.
Anyways, and they were really he had this sort of rhythm section band. And they were awesome. They were so cool.
And you got to see Gifts. Oh man.
Yes, it
Um,
was it was awesome.
so yeah, because whenever I got the chance to interview John recently, which was a complete honor, and like I still am kind of pinching myself that that was even able to happen. Um, Recently. And whenever he's like, "Yeah, Gifts is probably my favorite Propaganda era song too," and I was like, "Oh man, that was really just really cool to connect with them on that level for my favorite Propaganda era John song." Have him kind of affirm that was really awesome for me. What a cool moment.
I really that was one of my favorite episodes, I have to say, that you had done, your most recent one with John. And I
Yeah.
will say it got me kind of bummed about his some of his takes on his older songs, because him flat out saying, well, that's not a good song, that's not a good song.
Yeah,
So
he's got an
it's
interesting connection to a lot of his material.
and I get it as a songwriter myself, like the early stuff you cringe at for sure. I do the same, but I find it unbelievable, just especially the song we're going to talk about today is just it's a great song. I
Yeah,
know he doesn't
so
like it. He clearly doesn't like it based on that
it's
podcast,
really
but
funny. Um, Tell me about which version. So let's compare the two versions, right? We have Propaganda's version on Let's Talk More Rock. We have the Weaker Than's version on Fallow. Tell me a little bit about which one you like more and why.
so I'm just again back to that. Let's Talk More Rock is one of my favorite albums by Propaganda. That it's for sure goes to that song, and I just like again, if you listen to sort of the track order of that, I believe that's like the first one that you hear. That's like John right in the front.
Yep, number four.
If you go by the track listing, that you're just like, wow, like it really hits you as something completely different. Um, and I just again, I just love the sort of mix of just the sound of that record, and then John's voice over top of like the sound of those guitars and drums. Like it's just this crazy sort of doesn't seem like it fits, but it's just so good. So I'm very biased. I do love that version a lot more. And I like that it's short, right? It's like a minute and 40 seconds.
Hmm.
It just kind of got all it needs. So I did find the Weaker Thans version a little more drawn out, and had already known the song. So yeah, definitely like the Less Talk More Rock version.
I loved John's discussion in my interview with him where he was talking about why he reused some of the Propaganda songs for that first Weaker Thans record. And I found it to be really an interesting reflection where he included, he's like, yeah, I was feeling maybe a little bit less confident and I was like leaning on those songs. And I just thought that that was a really cool description for why he included those songs on the next record when he didn't really need to. You know what I mean? It was kind of, let's hopefully we can get some people to come along with me on this journey. And I loved his explanation for why he included those songs.
Yeah, and I totally get that, right? Like, he's kind of got, you know, fans along for the ride either way that are going to be Propaganda fans that will go check that album out. So I get it. I totally get it.
Yeah. Okay, so you made this cover of
Yeah.
Anchorless, and I want to know the story of your rendition and what this process was like for you. Tell us a little bit about like the backstory for how this all came together because it's just so wonderful. I know I told you this several times already, but I genuinely think it's fantastic. So tell us the story about it.
Sure. So it's a little different from the normal sort of songwriting I'm doing, but it all sort of starts the same. I What I found super fun about this is I rarely, if ever, ever do any cover songs. Usually just original work for either of the bands I'm in. So whenever I get to do something like this, it's super fun because it seems like a novelty where it's like, oh, this is all done,
Mm,
and you just kind of get to add the icing to it. Um, so in terms of, yeah, the process was more just like learning it first. So like, physically learning all the chord progressions, and then sort of listening to it acoustic, listening to Weaker Thans. I listened well, I knew the Less Talk More Rock a lot. So I kind of based it off that and then learned it on sort of acoustic guitar is usually where I'll go to as sort of the first part of the process, just to figure out all the chords. And then this one, for whatever reason, seemed the next place I took it was just sort of playing around on the piano with it and the keyboard. And I actually really liked how it sounded. And that's sort of why I kind of left it in that version and then just kind of really built upon more of like a sort of key version of it, like a keyboard sort of version of this song, and sort of dirtied it up from there. So yeah, it was super fun because it was, as you know, with this song, it's a short song, and it's actually it's a cool song when you break it down because it is very simple, but he does some really interesting things where, the chord progression of the both verses are completely different. Like he sort
mm.
of flips them around and backwards. Choruses are the same, and then the bridge is kind of different, and it's a little different than most bridges that you'll hear. It doesn't really build. It's sort of like a just a little sort of side piece, which I really like, the sort of counter melody to it. So yeah, it was super fun.
Nice. What instruments are we hearing from you? Like, what did you play on to make the recording?
So, well, this one was just kind of like I literally did this in a couple hours.
Hmm.
So it was just something quick. So I had it all scratched on acoustic guitar at first, and then I had played keyboard over that, and then I was liking the way the keyboard sounds, so I took the guitar out. So what you're hearing is mostly all keyboards,
Hmm.
and just with a lot of like distortion and sort of way like some big overdrive and saturation. So there's probably like 4 or 5 different keyboard tracks, and then the drums I just played on like my electric kit triggered up. So it's basically just drums and keyboards, which is like I never write songs like that, but just how it happened.
Dude, that is awesome. That is not at all what I was expecting you to say. That is fantastic.
What were you
Um,
thinking? It was something different?
I just thought it was like a fuzzed out guitar. You know what I mean? I was not
Yeah,
expecting
and
that.
it was going to be that, and then I was just like the and the thing with like I'm not a piano player, but I can play. But what I really enjoy about a piano is it's so easy to get all the notes. So like doing those like low octaves around his progressions, I don't know. I just really like the sound of how he put that chord progression together. So then I was like, oh, I just got to keep this keyboard because I like the sound of it.
So you didn't have to play bass on it.
No, there's no bass. It was all keyboard. Like
Amazing.
there was guitar and bass and all this other stuff, and I just ended up taking it out and just did a lot of different effects on keyboards,
You have no
which
idea how happy
which
this makes me.
which sounds hilarious because if my band members listen to this, they'll be like, "What the hell is he doing?" Because I will never write like this, but it just happened.
It's a really good way to spend some downtime if you've got it around the holidays. You know what I mean? Like mess
For
around,
sure.
try something new, see what comes out. You might just get on a podcast about propaganda with it. Amazing.
Exactly.
Was there anything like anything else that stands out to you about like the drums or the bass riffs or anything like that from the version whenever you were kind of like pulling the song apart and dissecting it? Did anything
Oh,
surprise you at all?
oh, for sure. I would say, especially because this is, an infamous thing on the internet, right? One of the things I did was like, okay, I'm going to look up the chords online. And then of course, you pull those up and I'm playing along and I'm like, well, these aren't right. Like it's,
Mm,
they're usually submitted by, the community. Um, and the one thing I'll have to do a big shout out here to the Sheet Happens guys. Are you familiar
yes.
with the
Oh,
yeah.
absolutely.
So so the thing is, there is no Sheet Happens for Let's Talk More Rock, at least that I'm not aware of.
I
Do you
believe
know if
they're
there
actually
is?
working on it in the future. It's kind of an in
Oh my God.
development thing.
Okay, that would be super exciting because my guitarist for Handheld and I, we love those things, and he buys them all. And, there's just it's especially for a band like Propaganda that you're such a big fan. It's like you want to know what they're actually playing.
Yeah.
So when you asked about what was surprising, I actually did find it tricky to figure out what Chris was playing over top because it's like he sort of in the second verse he plays a lot of these sort of high palm muted parts, and I had trouble figuring out exactly what he was doing, and all
Mm.
the tabs online were wrong. Um, and that's probably a little bit back to why I went with keyboards because I was like, well, if I try to do something exactly like he's doing, it's not going to sound like it. So there is a little bit of surprising sort of um, I would call it sort of high up on the neck sort of muted guitar work that Chris is doing. That's pretty interesting that you could kind of hear it, but it's not overpowering over John's vocals in the second verse. But it's pretty interesting if you take a listen.
Mm. Awesome. I love it. Um, so I don't know. And is there anything else that you feel like listeners should know? Like, do you have any like thoughts about the lyrics that like connect to your own life in any way that stand out? Is there any like, other personal resonance that you have with this one that you wanted to share?
Yeah, I would say I've definitely had that my own interpretation of it, and then I've heard interviews of John sort of breaking down his actual meaning. I don't know if you've seen those, what he's saying. Like I think mostly from what I've read from him, it seems to be like a family member that was close to him and died that they had like conflicted feelings about. Um, so I always sort of had heard this song in my head as like, sort of like not wanting to be chained down and leaving, the small town to do something else and, having a fresh start. So that was sort of always my takeaway with it. And I just sort of the imagery of this, I always sort of think about someone's yard with like an old rusty boat
Mm.
in the backyard. That's always where my mind goes. And it's just like you can sort of visualize just the look of that and sort of the sad feeling of that. It just, yeah, I just, I just feel like John, he always has, at least for me, just one of my favorite lyricists can always seem to paint a picture more than better than anyone else I find that I listen to.
I live in Buffalo, New York, and during the summer I ride my bike nonstop. It's like 5, 6 days a week I'm out on my bike riding around, and every single time I see a boat abandoned in like a parking lot or just on the side of a house or something like that, you can always see them a mile away. But I see so many abandoned boats here in Buffalo because we're surrounded by water. We got Lake
Of
Ontario,
course.
we got Lake Erie, we
Yeah.
got Niagara River, and there are boats everywhere. And there are so many. And I tend to stop my bike ride in the middle of it if I'm have a little bit of extra time to kill and snap pictures of boats. So I just have this folder on my phone of just abandoned boat photos from all over Buffalo on my bike ride. And like this is one of the lines that sticks with me most whenever I'm out and about in my normal life here in town. Just because the boat. It's just I see him everywhere. I see him every day. I saw him today, and I think about this song so regularly that it kind of blows my mind, you know?
That's great. I love that. It's just to me that's such a it's I don't know, I just love that line. Like it gets me thinking of you can immediately think about that feeling of what that would look like.
Yeah. Pat, where can people find you if they want to follow along or check out some more of your work? Why don't you go ahead and shout out your various projects that people can find?
Oh, absolutely. Definitely check out Handheld Punk. We're sort of most active on Instagram. Check out sort of our new record, Canadian Tragedy, which came out 2022. We're working on actually something pretty fun for us. We did like a 25th anniversary live album recording. That'll be coming out next year. So this will be the first anyone's heard of that. So we're pretty stoked for how that's coming out. And then for sure my other project, Curbside. We've got this album, a full length record that we're very excited about. That's
Mm,
literally been in the can for probably 7 years now.
nice.
It's been a very long process. We've got songs from probably like 2017 that we've been working on. So yeah, so we got a new full length record coming out with Curbside next year too.
Wonderful. Well, Pat, I am super pumped that you made this cover, that you tried something that is a little bit outside of your normal routine and a way of working. I appreciate the fantastic experiment because the results are absolutely wonderful and are such a wonderful addition to this podcast. Because whenever we made the Anchorless episode a long time ago now,
Yeah.
we didn't have a cover for the episode, and so you kind of just filled in a little gap for the back catalog. So I'm super grateful to you for your time, your energy, your effort on this, and for coming on the podcast to kind of tell me a little bit about it. It means a whole lot, man.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.